All right, well, let's start talking about Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is about school and the health programs that are in the schools, which I feel like is probably close to a lot of our hearts because so many of us just have so many memories, good and bad, likely, of school. And kind of going to this chapter is just kind of like revisiting maybe experiences that you had in health class or with maybe the school nurse or, you know, maybe the first time that you realized that certain people in your school were doing drugs and things like that. So let's go ahead and get started with that. After studying this chapter, we're going to be able to describe the whole school, whole community, whole child model, list the ideal members of a school health advisory council, illustrate why a school health program is important, probably the most important thing we're going to learn in this chapter, summarize written school health policies and explain their importance to the school health program, discuss processes for developing and implementing health policies. Next page. State the 10 components of the whole school, whole community, whole child model. Describe the role of the school health coordinator. Describe school health education. Identify 8 national health education standards. Demonstrate how a health education specialist could locate credible health education curricula. Discuss and briefly explain 4 issues that are facing school health advocates. All right, so let's make the case for why this is really worth our time and energy. Nearly every child goes to school and then they grow up to be adults, right? And so if you want to affect nearly every adult, start before they're adults when they're in school, right? Their schools are respected institutions. They're, a lot of places in government have become very controversial, and not that schools aren't controversial, but I think that schools are still respected in their communities, especially in rural communities like ours. I feel like schools are kind of just the central hub. Most people have gone to there or somewhere like there, and so they kind of have memories and feel connected to that place. Kids spend an incredible amount of time at the schools, more time than they do with their parents. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer. I don't think it is, but it certainly helps. I mean, think about if we didn't have a school. You would have people whose parents could afford to send them to school going to school, and those who couldn't not in school at all. And so that would really widen the gap between the kids of the middle class and the poor kids. So the idea is that every kid goes to a school, it's relatively similar, and then people can kind of make do with what they've been given. So in any social class, any race, again, are supposed to be treated equally and shown a way to live and work. And part of that is the school health program. All right, the whole school, whole community, whole child, here after abbreviated as WSCC model. So this is the model that the book uses to say, here is how we can implement a healthy school program. Focused on addressing educational and health needs of children within the context of the school setting. Again, you've got the kids there, and you have over 90% of the kids in the school setting. Let's see what we can do to address not just the education, but also the health needs of children. And what we'll see is that those two things are really blended together. If you are not healthy, it is difficult to learn. It's difficult to work. It's difficult to be in relationships with people. So community strengths can boost the role of the school in addressing child health and learning needs, meaning if you live in a community that has sports activities outside of school, that has walking paths, that has grocery stores that have attractive looking fruits and vegetables, if you have doctor's offices, if you have a community that bans public smoking, a community that welcomes people to do healthy activities, then that is going to obviously help the school this whole child, whole community model. But if the community is not as healthy, if it has drug problems, if it has poverty problems, if there's a lack of doctors and nurses, if there's a lack of activities that are healthy for people to do outside of the school, then that's going to be an extra challenge for the school to have to deal with. Right? So this model provides a shared framework for schools in the community to work together on a collaborative approach to health and learning. You know, when I was growing up, I was always kind of taught or just told, I think I probably picked it up from my parents, that the school reflects the community, right? So that if you have a community that say, yeah, they're kind of ho-hum about schooling and higher thought and learning and the emphasis that should be placed on, say, health or mathematics or anything like that, then you're going to have a school that's going to reflect those things. And then I watched a movie, I don't know, about 10 years ago, and it actually made the argument that actually the school is the first, they put out the people that then reflect, meaning that the school creates the environment of the community. So if the community is, say, ho-hum about health and ho-hum about learning, and then it probably originated from the school. I guess it's like kind of two ways to the same end, but I thought that was kind of interesting, especially when we're talking about schools and communities working together to approach health and learning. You know, ideally, I wish that schools weren't so isolated. It seems like in many ways, schools are kind of just separate, like parents don't really go inside and community people don't really go inside unless they have a good reason to, and then kind of vice versa, you know, but ideally those walls would be pretty low, you know, so that community people would feel like there's a place for me to help out at the school, and that the schools would be able to draw on the resources of the community, and they'd be able to bring students, say, you know, I think a lot of students, say, struggle with math, for instance. And if you'd be able to bring the students to a place where they use math in the community and say, we're not just teaching you this stuff just so that you can be frustrated and we have something to do, but you know, they use it here while they're building this bridge, while they're constructing this road. See these instruments? This is all math, and you have to be able to think about these things mathematically if you want the road to be straight, if you want the bridge to be sturdy. So anyway. The School Health Advisory Council. Okay, so the idea is that you have within the school a group of people who are going to work together to provide leadership and a plan. Here it says, provide advice and aspects of the school health program. Okay. So you have a core group of people, which actually feels a lot like what we learned last week, which is if you want to have something change, if you want to create a program, then you're going to need a core group of people that are committed and have some knowledge about it. Well, this is sort of an application of that idea. They're going to work together. You're going to have a diverse representation. Probably most of the people who are going to be on it are going to be people who are working at the school, but they don't always have to be, right? And their main role is to provide coordination of this whole school, whole community components. And so they're taking ownership of the model and making sure it's moving forward in a positive direction. So the school nurse, you know, everybody loves the school nurse, or at least that's what I imagine. They can provide that leadership for the school health program. You know, this core group of people who are moving the model forward, that are, you know, meeting and deciding how to implement it. A school nurse is somebody who would be a great leader of that group. Why is that? Well, they have medical knowledge and they have formal training, and they have responsibilities that puts them not just in front of students, but also in front of parents, and in front of administrators, in front of teachers, and also maybe community members. Unfortunately, not every district has a full-time nurse in it, and so sometimes they're pulling nurses from outside of the community and having them come to the school for a limited amount of time. I suppose there are advantages to that if you want to make that person the leader, especially if you want to have more of a community voice in the school. But if you would say, well, that person's not as committed as somebody who works at the school full time, then maybe they wouldn't be the best leader for that. All right. Well, what about the teacher? Well, you certainly would want at least a one or two teachers on this core group, because their role is going to be making this whole school, whole community model work. They're the ones that are spending most or more of their time with students than probably any other single individual in the school. Right? They're probably spending more time, waking hours rather, with children than their parents do. And so their ability to take the model and implement it on the ground floor, or just to have an attitude of like, oh, we got to do this, so let's do it and kind of get it over with, right? Well, that communicates to everybody that this is not important. We have to do this just because we have to do a lot of other things, and so, don't pay too much attention to this. This is just, we got a box we got to check, as opposed to saying, hey, we have a lot of potential for being really healthy and feeling really good, not just now as we're in school, but also afterward. So what can we do as children to make our current lives and our adult lives really happy and thriving and healthy by doing some of these things that are shown in the model? All right, a new need for school health. Do we really need this? I would argue yes. And the reason I think this slide is here, because you'll see some people who will say, well, listen, school is supposed to be about math and science and reading and history, and so if you're adding school health to this, it's taking away from some of the other things. And I might say, okay, to some extent that makes sense. But I think the reality is that you have a lot of students that are not as healthy as they should be. And because of that, they are going to have a hard time learning. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if I had a slide here, that would be great. But if you've taken a psychology class, you understand that according to Abraham Maslow, there are these basic needs that we have. And it's like for food, shelter, and so on. And if we don't have that, you can't really move up in that. Like, who cares about physics if I don't have shoes? If I'm cold, if I'm worrying about how I'm going to get home safely, that's an immediate need, and that's way deeper in my brain than like some theoretical idea about how the world works. So, health and success in life, or success in schools, I would argue life in general, but we'll argue here, are interrelated. If I can't focus, if my teeth hurt, if I'm hungry, if I'm worried about bullying, if I'm hungover, these are all things that are going to be impacting my success at school. And I'm kind of stressing this because it may be that other people in the school haven't bought into this yet. Right? A school health program provides the integration of education and health. If you think about, if we're training, let's talk about the cynic who's just like, what? All we really need school for is just to train people to go and work hard. Like, okay, I would disagree with that, but if that's where people are at, then that's where they're at, and I could meet them where they're at. And I would say, okay, well, do you know how many people are forced into retirement early because they are too unhealthy to work? It's a significant number. How many people are dying before they should because they're doing unhealthy behaviors, right? How many people are going to work and causing accidents because they are under the influence of alcohol or substances? How many people are going to prison because of health-related issues, right? And so trying to make the case that health actually impacts a lot more things than we might think of initially. So, all right, I have a picture of a scary guy here. He's meant to be my school administrators here. Now, probably your school administrators are a lot nicer than this guy, but if they're not, then you're going to have to try to make the case to them so that they are supportive. Because if they are not supportive, then they are going to make the job of the school health program much more difficult. Right? They're going to be stingy with funds. They're not going to lend their weight and their influence behind initiatives that are behind there. And so I think the key here is to understand what is important to them. And if what is important to them is students showing up, because that's how a school gets paid. It gets paid a certain amount of dollars every day that a student shows up, then you could say, well, great, let me tell you about the connection between health and attendance, because the healthier a student is, the more likely they are to show up, right? All right. So you want a well-organized school health advisory council, and you want written school health policies. I've actually been learning about this, in my current job over the last few years, that it's important not just to be able to do things well, but also to have those in policy that is written down and not just in culture. Because the reality is you have people coming in and coming out, and everyone kind of has a different interpretation of, say, what it means to like care for a student when they're sick, or be sensitive to a student whose parents are going through something. So having a written school health policy is really helpful in that. School health policies. So the steps for creating a local health-related policy include, okay, so for this, it's if you want to create a health policy around, say, do we have metal detectors, or what do we do when a student is telling the school nurse that they just started to become sexually active, something like that. So you're going to build a policy development team, right? Which everyone's going to want to be on. Of course, everyone wants to be on a policy development team. But the reality is that even though it may sound boring, the policy that is written is what is going to be most likely to be followed. So if you want to have some impact on the way things are going, not just for your current job or the people that you talk with, but for everybody throughout the school, this is where this is built, this policy development team, right? And so as a part of that, you're going to assess the environment. What is going on, right? Now, sometimes schools will say things like, well, we don't have a drug problem here at our school. You know why that is? Because they haven't done the assessment, right? It's easy to say that when you don't know what's going on. You kind of assume the best, right? Draft the policy, adopt the policy, implement the policy, and then you're going to measure what's going on after we've been doing this policy for a while. Compare that to the initial assessment and see, has anything changed? If it hasn't changed, then you're probably barking down the wrong path or barking up the wrong tree, however that analogy goes. And you're going to want to do something different. And then communicating those results. And here's why it's important to communicate the results. If you see a 10% change, maybe it's just over a year period of time, that actually is really significant, but it may not be noticed by everybody in the building. And so that's why you have to communicate it, right? If it was a 25% change, people would probably notice that, but if it's just 10% and you don't communicate that, people will be like, oh, well, we started this thing, it didn't work out, let's forget it. So while I did a brief overview of the steps of policy, let me go into a little bit more detail here. The people who are developing the policy are from this core group of people from the School Health Council. They're the ones that have come together to do things like this. And they're bringing their different expertise, either from the classroom or being part of nursing, being part of the nurse staff, or being an administrator or the PE teacher, and they're together writing these things, and it should cover all facets of the school health program. So that means it's going to cover things like who should hang on to a child's medication. What are we going to do about bullying? How do we think about foods that are being brought in from, say, children for birthday parties and things like that. And you're going to have to gain approval from the people who have the power in the institution. So that is, thinking about administrators, thinking about teachers. But having those people already sitting on the school health council is really going to help, because they're already interacting with those key stakeholders. This also reminds me of the gatekeepers from our previous chapter here. So now, while a policy is just super fun to create and talk about, if it just sits on a shelf, it's obviously not going to make that much change. We have to implement those policies. And while that seems obvious, I think the reality is in a lot of organizations, things like the policy manual just sit on a shelf, and maybe they're thrown at new employees when they first come in, because it kind of feels like an initiation process. That isn't the way that a good institution obviously is run. You have to be doing those policies and following what you said you were going to do. And if what you wrote isn't what you should be doing, then you should change what you wrote. So distributing those policies to those affected. Right? You're going to put it in various different places. This is not a secret. You're going to put it in faculty handbooks, student handbooks, staff handbooks. You're going to talk about them with teachers in larger group meetings. If there's a new policy that you think is worthy of having a whole meeting about, so people who maybe feel like this is not what I'm going to like, there's a whole section in our chapter about controversial topics and things like contraception, birth control, things like that. If you're going to get a lot of pushback from the community, then you should have a meeting and address those things in a larger forum. Otherwise, they're going to be people who are gossips, and they are going to take little tidbits of what is said and meant, and they're going to run with that, and they're going to blow things out of proportion. And so having a meeting for things like that might be really helpful. Newsletters. All right. Where are you going to get some resources to develop these policies? So there's actually 3 here that are mentioned, and they are almost example policies that you can pull from to say, okay, this is what is suggested, or these are some ideas for things that can be included as policy in the schools. So, most people who are going to be on this group, this executive team, are not going to be policy experts. They've probably never created policy before. They probably haven't read that much policy. And so using these resources, it's almost like being given a cheat sheet. Here's some things that we could do at our school, so you don't have to kind of start from scratch. All right, let's talk about the components of the whole school, whole community model. So one of the models is talking about the administration of the school health program, like who's in charge, how are we going to distribute responsibilities. The school health services, I'm going to list these real quickly because we're going to talk about them more in details in the next few slides. This healthy school environment, how are you going to think big picture about how the entire school can be healthy? What are you going to do about health education? We think about health classes, but it could include other things as well. Thinking about counseling, psychological services, the services that are maybe provided by the school social worker or by outside agencies, guidance counselors to students. Thinking about PE and then physical activity in general. A lot of schools have actually reduced physical activity, sometimes even PE classes for students. Nutritional environment and services, right? Everyone's favorite, school lunches. What are our policies going to be around that? Community involvement. How are you going to help the community be involved in the school, specifically around health? right? You have you think about doctors and nurses who are in the community, but you also could think about, Taekwondo centers, and you could think about even sewage treatment plants, and just helping people understand, or students rather, about health, and kind of bridging the gaps between the school and the community. Family engagement. I love that idea. I wish that families were more involved in the schools. I bet teachers also wish that families were more involved in the classroom. I know that some schools in our area used to do that, and then it didn't go well, but it seemed to me like there was just one parent that made a mistake, and then they canceled the whole thing. So. And then employee wellness. You have a lot of people who are working at the schools, and you're going to want healthy workers because they're going to be absent less. All right, real quickly on this slide, administration and organization of the healthy school model, right? It should be administered by the school health coordinator. That's the leader of that executive team of people. Our book mentions that a school nurse is an ideal candidate for that, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a PE teacher, it could be a health teacher, it could even be an administrator who maybe has experience in public health or something of that nature. It's a trained professional at the state, district, or school level who is responsible for managing, coordinating, planning, implementing, and evaluating school health policies, programs, and resources. Having somebody who's spearheading this is really going to add support so that somebody's responsible. If you don't have somebody responsible, then it's going to probably fizzle out pretty quickly, or people are just going to kind of pick it up and let it go as is convenient. This is not a position that is required by the states, meaning it's not like there's no law that's forcing the schools to have somebody who is in charge, but it is going to be much more effective if there is somebody. School health services. So these are health services that are provided by a school health workers to appraise, protect, and promote health. Again, I think of the school nurse as being the person who is doing this role. This is going to include things like first aid. When I was in 4th grade and I did a flip off of those bars and I landed right on my knees and just tore them apart, that would be an example of who gives treatment in those situations. Emergency care and assessment. Do I need to go to an emergency room at this point, or can we handle that on site? Right. Planning for the management of chronic conditions. What about somebody who has seizures, somebody who has asthma? Who's going to help in those situations? What are the protocols for that? Originally, these school health services were meant to be a supplement to what the family was doing at the home or what the primary doctor was doing, but because of a lack of family support or a lack of primary doctor support for many of the students, this school health services has grown. There's a lot more of these services today in the schools than there was 40 years ago, and that has come with its share of baggage in some of the schools. But the framework for the 21st century school nursing practice calls for student-centered nursing care that is focused on care coordination. So not just things that are happening in the school necessarily, but if the child, say, needs additional services, maybe like physical therapy, they're going to help coordinate those for the student. Leadership. That means that there are some things that are going to be happening outside of the nurse's office. Let's say that somebody has a seizure disorder. What is the protocol if they have a seizure in the classroom, in the gymnasium, in the cafeteria? They're going to provide leadership to saying, okay, this is what needs to happen, and then communicating to that vision to everybody who's going to be interacting with that student. I guess not the teacher, not the students, but the adult in the room is going to know, okay, when this happens, then this is what we're going to do. So, quality improvement, not just doing the same thing that we were doing last year, but what can we do differently to make this more efficient, to make this work better next time, to iron out the bumps. And then community and public health, that that we're using the standards of public health to help make our decisions. Healthy school environment. So by law, school districts are required to provide a safe school environment. Glad that law is in there, right? That seems like one that is worth keeping. But what does that actually look like? I mean, every school is going to say that they're trying to provide a safe school environment. So two components here. That is the physical environment. So that's going to be a school building that is safe to be in. It doesn't have mold, it doesn't have asbestos, it doesn't have lead pipes that are contaminating drinking water. It is not going to have ledges that people can fall off easily. The land on which the school is located and the area surrounding it. So the school is not just responsible even for just the buildings, but also the land that it's on. And then, the immediate area around it. What can the school do to keep that safe? And I think about crossing guards in that situation. So the social and emotional climate. This has gotten a lot of attention more recently. And this is because school is not just a place to learn about math and science. It's also a place to interact with other students. And some of those students are going to be mean and some of them are going to be rude. And what kind of a culture is being set at the school so that people, students, teachers feel safe being there and they feel included. They feel like this is where I want to be. This is a place for me, and that's obviously going to impact learning. School health education. I think about health class. This is going to include the development. You're creating curriculum, the delivery of curriculum, and then the evaluation of a planned curriculum. How effective is the curriculum in impacting the lives of the students? And I feel like it's very easy I'm a teacher, it's very easy for me to develop curriculum. I can use some that publishers give me, I can create my own, I can deliver that curriculum like I am now, but the evaluation is oftentimes a lot harder because giving grades is fairly easy, but this is actually not what that's referring to. What that's referring to is if you have this level of, say, student drug use, then after you do the delivery of the curriculum, you want it to go down, right? But if it's not, then something's going on. But you won't know that unless you evaluate. So evaluation's tough. It's tough in a lot of areas of healthcare delivery. I read a recent study about counselors that are actually in some ways, they don't get better throughout their years of counseling, and sometimes they get worse. But because they don't evaluate very well, they actually think that they're getting better when they're really not. So anyway, evaluation is really important in so many areas of life and health. So priority health context. So what should be a priority when it comes to teaching school health? Alcohol and other drugs. Fortunately, actually, alcohol and drug use has actually come down in the last few decades, with the exception of marijuana, which is now legalized in Illinois. So I don't know if that's even a good drug to loop in there. But healthy eating, that has probably gotten much worse. If you look at obesity statistics, for the last 40 years, they've gotten much worse. Mental and emotional health, again, gotten much worse. No thanks to social media. Personal health and wellness, physical activity, safety, sexual health, that actually has probably gotten a little bit better. Teens are actually having less sex than they were 20 years ago, even though no one told us that, so everyone thinks they're worse. But tobacco use, again, gotten better. And then violence prevention. I'd like to say we've also gotten better when it comes to violence prevention. Overall, there's been, I think, a few upticks recently, but I think overall the trend for violence has gotten better. Development of and sources of health education curricula, right? So where is this curriculum coming from? Well, there's a lot of different places there. National specialists, State Department of Health, commercially produced curriculum. All right, that's enough of that. All right, what are some other parts of this whole school, whole community So counseling and psychological and social services. I actually used to do this in a previous job where I went into schools and I tried to work with kids to improve their mental health capabilities. Pretty common for these to be on school grounds. Physical education and physical activities. Think about PE teachers that are trained in understanding how to best engage students in this. And realize the goal here is for lifelong physical activity. And this is probably where a lot of it breaks down. But if we don't do evaluations, well, I guess we do evaluations on that. If you look at the statistics of like how many adults in America are getting the recommended amount of physical activity, it's like less than 25% of us that are actually getting the recommended amount of physical activity. It seems as though like when you're young, it's like you're doing a lot if you're in sports, and if you're not, you're not doing that much. And then after high school, most people aren't doing sports, and then it's like by the time you hit 40, almost nobody is doing like a heavy intense sporting activity, and so nobody's doing the recommended amount of physical activity. So that's unfortunate, but that's probably more to do with the way we're working today. We're sitting too much. Nutritional environment and services, right? So things like, how can we make healthy food in our cafeterias more appealing, right? So I think a lot of the attitudes, and I'm stepping on toes here, and that's okay. I think a lot of the attitudes is, if we put it on the tray, then we've done our job. Like if you take overcooked asparagus from a can and you put it on a tray, then it's like, well, we provided it, right? And if nobody eats it, well, that's not our fault. And I think there's actually good reason to say, well, I can't do any more from an administrative perspective, because a lot of schools are underfunded and they don't have time to say, get fresh asparagus. I think there's probably more options than we realize, and that may be like contracting with local farmers or growing some of the food in the backyard of the school, especially in rural areas like ours. Sometimes there are grants that are available for things like fresh fruits and vegetables, but sometimes even those fail, where a lot of the fresh fruits and vegetables that are coming to the schools due to grants end up being put in the trash anyway. So, but just thinking about nutrition, and maybe even bringing a student on to talk about what would be more effective in this way. So community involvement, I talked about that a little bit. Family engagement, anything that I think the school can do to involve the family is going to pay back twice, because now you're not only telling the students how to be healthy in the school, but then they're being that message is being reinforced in the homes. And so, and not just for the students, but also for the parents. So if you say to students, we're going to brush twice a day and you're going to floss, and then that message goes home to the parent, then the parent may say, hey, did you floss your teeth before you go to bed? Let's make sure we're doing that. And then the parents saying that, maybe they're like, I didn't do it either. So they're going to go ahead and do it. So employee wellness, you have a lot of people who are working at the schools. You have administrators, you have teachers, you have support staff who are both in the classroom and in the administrator's office. You have repairmen and janitors and people like that. And what can you do to support those people and help them be as healthy as they can be? Because health is contagious, in the sense that when people are looking healthy and they're acting in healthy ways, students are going to notice that and copy those behaviors. All right, issues and concerns of the school health program. Sorry, I'm gonna read straight here. There's a lack of support for whole school, whole community programs. Unfortunately, people think of schools as places where we just teach subjects, and there's sort of I think a narrow view of what will be helpful in those situations. I think that a lot of times when things come from maybe the government, and as they trickle down, the vision was really good to begin with, and there was a lot of evidence to support it. But by the time it trickles down through the various bureaucratic places, by the time it actually gets to the student, it just becomes a box to check. I think that's part of it as well. I think that parents aren't always supportive of these sorts of things in the schools. School health curriculum challenges in terms of how do you get a curriculum into the classroom that is going to be effective, that requires training the teachers who are going to be delivering that curriculum. Being a teacher has gotten much harder in the last 20 years. I think that's one of the reasons why we're just not effective in recruiting as many people into the schools to be teachers. There's a lot more just criticism from the media, from the larger community, from parents, from students, from administrators, and so it kind of just makes it hard to do something new, right? Something else. So violence in schools is unfortunately still a reality for teachers, for other students. In 2021, you saw a lot of school shootings, and that is scary. And I'm not going to talk about guns because that's just a whole other topic, a can of worms. So I'm not going to bring that up. But I guess I just thinking about that when people go to school and they're worried about their safety, that is going to interfere with their ability to learn and present extra challenges. So, a lack of support for this model. It is not caught on. There's not as many people who are implementing it, and that's probably because it's seen as optional. And I think that, again, I think schools are under a lot of pressure today. They're not as supported as they were in the past. I think they still have a lot more support than, say, the mayor's office or Springfield does. But I think that there's more criticism of schools, of teachers today than there was in the past. And our book, says that if there was legislation that was more supportive, that brought money for implementing this, that had a stronger hand in forcing schools to implement this model, then that would obviously bring more success. So, school health curriculum challenges. If you think about what's actually being taught, there are controversial topics. And there are people in the community with strong opinions about those topics. Those topics would include things like sexuality, birth control, dating violence, suicide, substance use. And again, because typical school, the parents, if they have any exposure, it's probably just to drop their kids off. And so it's almost like that's not a place, I think, where parents they feel welcomed, and so then when they hear that the teacher is teaching something about sexuality to their child that they may not agree with, I think it becomes easy to kind of like the rumor mills begin to spread and through conservative media outlets and through Facebooks and things of that nature, and I think that makes it tough for administrators and for teachers who are saying, look, you're not in the schools on a daily basis. You don't know what's going on. And your version of the child's reality may be very different from what the child is actually experiencing. So like the age-old question, if you teach a child how to use birth control, will they have sex now that you've shown them how to do it? I think a lot of parents are going to say, yeah, you are. Like if my child is being taught this, then they are going to interpret that as permission. Whereas from the teacher's perspective or the administrator's perspective, they're saying, listen, we did the assessment and what we found was we have a lot of students who are sexually active and their parents don't know and they don't understand how to use birth control or contraceptions. And so we're not introducing an idea, sex, to them that they haven't heard. In fact, the data shows that lots of students have lots of exposure to this sort of stuff. And so we're trying to be an adult who is facing reality. And they would say, parents, you're not facing reality. You're not having these conversations with your children in the home on a regular basis. Movies are, music is having the conversation with them. They're obviously sensationalizing it and giving a probably rather inaccurate view of this. And so we can ignore it and not be the adult in the room, or we can face it up to the facts and be the adult in the room, bringing accurate information to that. So I went on too long on that one. Improper implementation. It's often provided by individuals other than health education specialists. It could just be that, somebody has room in their schedule and they have been assigned, oh, I need you to teach this curriculum, say, on sexuality or on substance use or on mental health. And the person might say, well, I'm a math teacher. Susie, who is trained in this, she's got a class during this time, so she can't teach it. So that may end up happening. So, all right, almost done here. School-based health centers. These are health centers that are located on school grounds, right? And this is done in a traditional way, in the sense that there's like a room where the professional sits and then students come to them. Or it could be school linked, where the school has a relationship with an outside organization, or it could be mobile, like a vehicle that maybe comes to the school and is there and is able to provide treatment on school grounds, but in a mobile, like mobile health vehicle, or through telehealth, where the student is communicating with the health professional on the telephone, and the school has set up that relationship for them. Culture wars, again, this is controversial because some people are going to see health-based community or school-based health centers as merely condom distribution centers, and so when you bring this up, that's all they can hear and that's all they can see. And so obviously, if you want their support, they're going to be reluctant to give it, right? And then funding challenges. Who pays for these services? You have minors that are going to be using it, and then the school may say, well, we don't have room in our budget for that, and so this is a struggle. So, violence in the schools. The high-profile incidents of violence in the schools. Unfortunately, a lot of students, report that they've been a victim of bullying in the schools. I guess high-profile would just be like things that are famous, like a school shooting, and there have been some here, even in Paducah, which is really, really sad and kind of breaks our kind of collective heart as to why people from the outside would come in and shoot, or why a student themselves would feel like their life is so difficult that they're going to resort to violence, even violence that seems rather random, right, for them. So bullying is obviously an issue, and the newest version of bullying is electronic aggression. When I was young and I was in school, if you could make it through the day without being bullied, then once you got off the bus, then you kind of had a breath of fresh air until you went back there. But nowadays with electronic media, it's 24/7 for that. And so fortunately, there are proven, or should I say evidence-based, again borrowing from last chapter, ways of improving the school climate as it relates to violence and bullying. And that is, again, something else that the school health council can grab a hold of and run with. So a couple of questions here. This is the last slide. Why is a whole school health program model so challenging to implement in every school district? If you think about that, I think it's why it's so challenging. I think that it depends on somewhat the culture of the community and how embracing are they going to be to new ideas. How much are they going to accept the idea that things in the school that are going to be shared and taught are not just academic per se, that are going to relate to social and physical health, and that's going to be a challenge. Funding for it, administrative support. Are the teachers going to view this as just another task that's put on their plate, even though there's nothing taken off their plate and there's no extra money given? I think all of those things are going to be challenges. How can schools have more effective health programs with limited funding? This is a good question. I think if you have somebody who is a leader who really understands it and spearheads it and believes in it, and maybe that could be one of you all, then I think that really helps. If you have everybody who's kind of like, I'm not really sure what this is, or if it only comes from, say, administrators or an outside organization that maybe got some grant money and they're coming in, they're going to run into all those problems that we talked about last chapter. And so I think having somebody who's kind of taking ownership and committing to this is going to be really helpful, especially if they're, say, a teacher or they're an administrator or they're the nurse. That is going to be really helpful to do that. I'm a believer in like trying new things, and so, what could you do for this? Could you bring in an outside health professional to lend credence and support to this? Could you get a local doctor to help with this? Could you get, I was thinking about like, can you bring parents in and have them be people who help with this? I'm a big fan of bringing more community people into the schools. We've had this real problem over the last few years with a lot of teachers dropping out of the profession altogether, and there's not enough teachers to take their place. And so while I think that there's things you could do to improve that, like pay them more or give them, I don't know, additional supports in some way, I also think about the fact that we have more elderly people today than we've ever had before, and a lot of elderly people who have retired are probably looking for productive, meaningful things to do. Is there a way that we can kind of bridge the need with the resources of elderly people in the community in some way? I'm kind of just thinking outside the box here, but I think a clear vision, a clear belief that it's worth doing. If you can really like look up the data and see people who are unhealthy in the school, are they missing more? What are their grades like? I think doing an assessment and finding out like, how many people are using drugs and alcohol, how many people are sexually active at a young age, how many people are a victim of bullying. There's all kinds of ways that you can use students in the schools in different ways, like peer juries, like for instance, if a student is bullying somebody else, rather than having them brought before an administrator and the administrator gives the punishment, can you have other students who act as a jury to decide the punishment for that student? And I think there's a lot of different ways, and I think a lot of those things are going to be outlined in a couple of those resources that I talked about in this chapter. So, well, this has gotten way longer, so I'm going to stop here.